Hey guys, welcome back to more relationship family drama stories. In this video, my family kicks me out of my own farm to give it to my entitled sister. I am absolutely baffled and have no idea what to do. Let's dive right into the video. And the title story starts like this. My family situation is not what I would consider normal. Not much is truly outlandish nowadays, but still, I was an only child until I wasn't. My sister was born when I was 16. If the age gap was not bad enough, then the complete transformation of my parents was despicable. I get that my parents had me when my mother was just 17 and it locked her and my dad into a marriage and a life that consisted of sustaining on scraps to take care of me. But still, that was never something that should have been taken out on me. Ultimately, I was raised by my grandparents more than my parents. They only tried to actually take over raising me once I was going into high school with spectacular grades, and they realized that they had not properly effed me up with their abuse and neglect when I was a child. I shunned this surge in interest. I'd never lived full-time under my grandparents' roof while they neglected me, but during high school I practically did in order to avoid these attempts at exploitation from my parents. I think it was a petty desire to get back at me for this that caused them to have another child. The differences were immediately apparent with my sister. My dad had a stable career by the time she was born, even though not a dollar had gone towards my mom or me in the last 5 years, but suddenly they could afford anything. Before my sister's birth, my mother had lived on my grandparents' money and whatever she could pry away from my father's tight grip while she turned our living room into a pigsty to the theme of reality TV. She didn't get work, instead she used the new child as a justification to ask for even more money. This money she poured into giving her daughter everything she could ask for and transforming herself with cosmetics and plastic surgery. My sister was only 2 by the time I left the house with no plan to return, and it was completely transformed. My parents doted on her, my grandparents were sentimental, and they continued to support my parents with plenty of money from their savings and investments while they were alive. They were not foolish enough to give my parents actual control of their money though. So then, in the will, I was the sole beneficiary. When my grandparents died, I had been away from home for 7 years already. I had almost forgotten the drain of dealing with my parents, and for that first year or so, I was never allowed to forget it as they haunted me for various properties. I stood firm though. While my grandparents had left me a hefty sum of funds in various forms, what I truly cherished was the land and comfortable farmhouse that they gave me. I transferred for work and got to work learning how to actually care for the land. I had spent plenty of time on the land and working it as a child and teen, but that was far from understanding how to manage it so that it thrived. Especially with the need to hire some of the labor while I kept my full-time job, I was not making much off of it. The work itself and seeing the land sustain itself was more fulfilling than any sum of money could be. Then the recession struck. Layoffs meant that I was out of a job. Luckily, anyone I was paying for help on my land was part-time and I was able to keep a lot of their help. Instead of letting my layoff become a reason to sit back and try to just leech off my inheritance, I got to work making the farm my full-time career. And I never looked back. I did well enough as a career man, but I realized that it had only been a distraction from this work that I found so much more fulfilling. Early on, my work-life balance was more like a work and occasionally sleep balance. I had to take out some loans. Yes, I had inheritance, but to pull out funds tied up in investments in the recession would have been detrimental to these funds in order to not completely implode on those first few years full-time, but I managed it. I came out on the other end comfortable. While my sister surely had doting parents, I would never choose her own upbringing over mine. I imagine it is much more crippling to live like my sister. By 18 she had no plans to ever leave the house and spend more time in between jobs than actually at them due to being fired. She still could do no wrong in the eyes of our parents. They were still the same selfish and lazy people, even if they had acted a different part for the sake of my sister. When my sister reached 20 without her having any expectation of leaving home, my parents' patience was strained. Fortunately for them, they had the perfect solution. They simply needed to give my sister my farm, thus kicking me out of the property. In my mother's mind, it was her parents who died, so why should I get their property? Things like wills only matter to my mother if they are giving her more property. She has a wonderful blind spot for things that don't benefit her. When they came to my home, it was the first time my mother had been on the property since her parents' funeral service. They were not calm and careful though. They showed up with a car full of my sister's possessions. I came out to figure out just what they were doing on my farm when I overheard my sister whining and griping at them at how the animals were gross and the crops were dingy and ugly. I walked out of my front door and said that she shouldn't have to worry about it if she doesn't like the land, considering she will never have to do more than visit. However, my mother did not even greet me. I should consider it quite a step towards her being civilized though, that she even took the time to thank me for taking care of the land and for leaving it now that they were in need of it. I asked her what she could possibly mean by such a blatantly stupid statement, and she explained to me that she and my father had decided that it was time that my sister finally grew to understand and be able to handle responsibility. Let me tell you, it is jarring to be 36 and finally hear the first thing that you can actually agree with your mother on. I said as much and asked what that had to do with my farm. My mother said that she knew I would do the right thing and help my sister get on her feet. Apparently, this farm was just a thing to allow my sister to learn responsibility with no risk of losing anything if she catastrophically fails. After all, my mother and father had not seen a penny of what the farm had made since her parents died, and they were just fine. It was now my apparently familial responsibility to take that money I had hoarded away from them and leave the farm for their use. I had enough trouble with my parents during all the contesting of the will. Even though they had never tried to claim the farm, I had collected all the legal documents and had it all in perfect order to make sure this could never happen. They didn't want to hear me when I first told them that there would be no such arrangement. I told them that the land was mine alone, and as such I had say over who could be there and when. As far as I was concerned, they were trespassing. Our first bout ended when I had my phone on speaker ringing 911. Over the next few months, I did not have to deal with my parents much more. My sister, on the other hand, I could not go a week without her pulling some kind of stunt. I'm not entirely sure how my parents got her to be so motivated at first, but it became clear why she continued later on. She learned enough about my schedule that she began planning get-togethers with her friends and trashing my place at truly incredible speeds. She had gotten it into her head that if she could get me off of her land, then she would have a place away from the oversight of her parents to become the true degenerate that even they would not allow. I called the cops on her more than once and only restrained myself from calling the cops for some deluded idea of her being family. An idea that I did not hold as strongly to on the day after I had to be out of town for a week. I arrived home from a friend's wedding and could immediately tell that something was wrong with the poor state of the farm. It should have had multiple full-time workers taking care of it while I was gone, and I know they would not shirk their duties for nothing. The answer made itself clear in the abundance of cars that completely surrounded the house, trampling the yard directly around it. I immediately called the cops and had the multi-day party broken up, and I tried to get them to take my sister as well. She claimed that the farmhouse was given to her by her parents and that I had no right to do such a thing. The cops had their hands full and ended up leaving without her in custody. I began chewing her out, but she ran off and locked herself in one of the rooms of the house. I took apart the door handle to get past the locket and found myself opening the door into the bedroom my sister had crafted. She loudly sobbed with her face in the pillows. I called a lawyer and started the paperwork for her lawsuit. My sister had destroyed the documentation of my ownership as if my documents were anything more than copies for ease of showing my claim. It took a little bit of extra effort, but I had all the documents back in my hands by the time I finally pried my sister away from my property to bring her to court. My sister was named legally responsible for all the damages due to her dismissing my workers and partying for multiple days in my home, which meant that she would be my parents' responsibility for a bit longer as she had no money of her own. They also issued a restraining order and I filed for one against my parents as well. Fortunately, they have not challenged me on if I would enforce this, and I guess I proved my willingness already. So in the end I went no contact with all of them, and I'm happy to say that I had no further issues with these ridiculous entitled douchebags. I'll try and continue to honor the legacy of my grandparents by working hard on the farm and try to stay profitable with it. And yeah guys, if you enjoyed the title story, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because we are getting closer and closer to 130,000 subscribers. Thank you so much. The next one is titled How My Friend Became Famous in the Village. Post posted by user JendrixC on r/ripe stories. First of all, this story has no negativity, but I hope it fits here nonetheless. So I want to share a story when my friend involuntarily became the biggest attraction of the village. Small background, I started working in 2016 and made some friends in the company, especially those who worked on my shift. One of them, Michael, trained me how to operate one of the machines and I frequently worked next to him. We had a few machines doing the same stuff side to side. At one point in 2018, he asked me for help to work on his house, since where we live you usually don't hire companies but get friends over to help in exchange for a beer and a steak. I got to him on a Sunday and Michael already had scaffolding installed, so after a cup of coffee, we climbed up the scaffolding and started working. While driving to his place, it was hard to get a parking space despite there usually being enough space for every house plus a visitor. He then told me that his village had a spring festival and pointed to a patch of grassland on the other side of the road. We laughed it off and started working on the outer walls. After our noon break, we had to work on the highest parts of the house. Now, I need to tell you that he has a 3-story building and I'm really not comfortable with working on ladders. So when it came to the highest parts of the wall, the scaffolding was not reaching high enough, so brought his own ladder and put it up in the most unsecure way ever and worked on the higher parts while I did the lower parts and checked his ladder all the time. After he was done, we heard a huge wave of applause coming from the spring festival. I brushed it off as they had a live band playing there until I saw that they were looking over to us. Understandably confused, we both climbed down the scaffolding and went over to the festival since we wanted to go there anyway. We joined one of the tables where another coworker sat and he greeted us with a big grin on his face. Michael was still a bit confused as to what was going on, so he asked our friend what was so funny. He then told us that while we were working on the highest parts of the wall, his acrobatics on the latter apparently became so interesting that all festival visitors stopped listening to the music and began to watch him violating literally any safety regulations in existence. Then we realized that the wave of applause was actually directed at him and we all started laughing. After that incident, many people in the village kept giving him a friendly smile whenever they met him. And the next one is titled My A-hole Cousin-in-Law. And by the way, Ripe Stars, I need to ask you one thing I'm really curious about. What sort of stories do you enjoy the most on my channel? Because to be honest, a while ago I did a lot of Am I the A-hole stories. However, the big issue I had with those stories was that a lot of other people read these stories, so it's kind of boring to have the same story on like 10 different channels. Let me know what you think about that. This one was posted by user 1for all plus ultra on r/ripe stories, our own subreddit. So I am a 27-year-old autistic French Canadian. This happened when I was around 23 to 24. I wanted to get my first actual car from a used dealership and my cousin-in-law was working at one here in my local area when he was still living here. He told me that he could help me get a great rate and a good deal on the car I chose to get, but what he neglected to mention was that he was not actually someone with that kind of power. He had even gone so far as to pressure me into actually signing the dealership contract, knowingly taking advantage of my naivete, as I tend to put too much trust in family before learning the hard way that they were actually screwing me over, due to how my autism affects me mentally, and that tends to be an issue. Long story short though, he had manipulated me into getting him a $500 bonus at work for referencing him as the one who sent me to the dealership. While I was stuck with paying bi-weekly car loan fees with 16% interest and ridiculous insurance fees, going over $400 for the monthly insurance fees alone. He even went a step further by purchasing his own car in full, no payments or anything, and rubbing the receipt in my face, stating it was all thanks to me that he was able to get the car he wanted. He is honestly one of the reasons why I'm losing my faith in humanity's kindness, as he is an entitled, manipulative jerk who could not care less about who his actions hurt or the consequences they cause for those around him. Needless to say, my aunt and uncle were not too happy with him and even went so far as to chew his ass out for manipulating me like that. My uncle is a big man, over 6 feet tall, and he can be quite intimidating when he wants to be. He still tells stories of how my brother would just cry at the sight of him as a baby, honestly quite hilarious, but despite his stature, he's nothing more than a big teddy bear and you will find no one else friendlier. Unless you do something to piss him off, then you're in to see his angry side. I tend to have mental breakdowns quite easily, and this situation with my CIL happened when my aunt and uncle were out camping for the long weekend around late August, early September. That's usually the same time every year that they take their final camping trip of the year before starting back up again sometime in late April. This info is relevant, as you will learn in a second. So when they got back, they obviously were not happy with me, and my uncle started having an argument with my CIL, who used providing for his own family, he had no kids at the time, as justifiable means to have manipulated me like that. My other cousins and one of their partners were there at the time and were not happy with him either. The only one who supported my CIL was his wife, the youngest of my aunt and uncle's kids. They stated that he wouldn't have dared try to manipulate me the way he had, with my aunts and uncle being around, and chose their camping trip as the perfect time to strike and take advantage of my vulnerability. They also pointed out that in the time that he and I knew each other, back when he was still only my cousin's boyfriend, he has not once been nice to me, always taking advantage of my kindness and generosity. Making fun of me for my weight and the struggle I was going through trying to slim down for health reasons. Trying to guess some scenes in my animatic rough drafts that involved RAPE when he knew that type of assault was one of my triggers that pissed me off to no end. He fumbled at that accusation, trying to find the words to defend himself against that accusation, but in the end, he just kept making the same excuses about how he was justified in what he did. As this bickering between everyone continued on, my anxiety was starting to get the better of me, and I found myself having trouble breathing before I ended up breaking down hard because I felt responsible for the chaos that broke out, and my aunt, bless her soul, saw what was happening and tried to calm me down. When that didn't work, however, she shouted for my uncle and CIL to stop and pointed out that I was having a breakdown. Now, my uncle is a no-nonsense kind of man, and you would have to be crazy to even talk back to him when he is upset, so when he told me to stop trying to grab for attention, I shouted at him through my breakdown, "I'm not doing this for that." The whole room went silent, as everyone in there knew the repercussions of doing something like that when my uncle is angry. But my uncle is a good man and saw that I was genuinely upset and pulled me aside to hug me and calm me down. He reassured me that everything was okay and that the aggressive tension in the air was not my fault, though I was still partially to blame for putting my trust in my SCIL. I was not responsible for the chaos their arguments were causing, and that he still loved me. In the end, my cousins, aunt and uncle still don't like my CIL to this day after that stunt he pulled with manipulating me, and my family has done everything they can to support me as I struggle to adjust to my new life and balancing the payments of my vehicle and other daily necessities. My CIL is currently moved out of town and now has 2 kids and a third on the way. I'm just hoping that they don't take after him and are better people like their grandparents on their mother's side of the family. And yeah, Ripe Stars, once again, thank you so much for sharing your stories on the subreddit, and for those who don't know, if you have an interesting story of your own to share, then please head over to r/ripestories on Reddit, where you can share your own stories, and there's a good chance that I will read them in a video if there is a good story to be read. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. Karen in a bakery. So some backstory, I work in a mom and pop style bakery. It's a family owned business and our bakers come in at 2:30 every morning to make all our donuts from scratch. We are known for having great gourmet donuts as well as some experimental ones that are not advertised on our Facebook page. The way we work is first come first serve. If a customer wants a specific type of donut or pastry, they either have to call 24 hours ahead of time to place an order, or they can call the same day. If we have the donuts they want same day, we can box them and set them aside for pickup. Otherwise, we have no obligation to save donuts for anyone, even if they are a regular customer. So last week I was closing with a newer employee and I was responsible for training her on how to close. And it is getting dangerously close to Halloween, our busiest season, as we sell special Halloween cookies. We were extremely busy and I was behind on my closing task. We close at 5 PM on most weekdays and it was about 4:45 and we still had most of our closing tasks to finish. In comes Karen, luckily to an empty lobby, or this would have been much worse. Karen promptly informed us that this was her first time in the bakery and she had driven about 2 hours to get there. She said she saw our pumpkin donuts on Facebook and wanted some. We informed her that we had sold out a couple hours prior, and Karen then said, "Well, can't the bakers just make more?" Me, the bakers are not here anymore. They come in around 2:30 AM in the morning to make donuts and go to bed around 7 PM, so they don't like to be here until closing. Karen, that's a shame. I came all the way here from XYZ. Me, sorry about that. I then hand her a business card with our hours and said, "You can call ahead any time to order whatever you want and we can also ship out of state." Karen, that doesn't help me now. Me, I'm sorry about that. Our donuts are just first come first served. We can never guarantee our stock unless you call ahead. However, is there anything that we have here that looks good for you maybe? Keep in mind that we still have plenty of donuts filling 2 full cases, the equivalent of about 15 9x26 pans full of goods. Karen, how much is a dozen? Me, it's $9 for a standard dozen, but we have some donuts that are a slight upcharge. Those are the ones that are more complicated and take more ingredients or are otherwise larger donuts. And by the way, I can point those out to you as you are choosing if you would like. Karen, $9 is too much. Me, unsure what to say because I sell the donuts, lady, not set the prices. Karen, fine. I guess I will just take a dozen. Coworker and I begin boxing the donuts that she chooses. We point out which donuts are upcharged as she chooses them. She then points to one of our gourmet donuts, a specialty chocolate version of our most popular seller. We only offer it 1 day a week. Karen, what if I want a dozen of these? Gestures to the chocolate donuts. Coworker, those are $10 a dozen. Karen, I thought you said $9. Why the extra $1? They are made the exact same way. Coworker, I don't know, My coworker is stammering. She hasn't been here long enough to know how things work, so I decide to step in and defuse the situation. Me, they are more expensive because they take extra ingredients and more time to prepare than our standard ones. Therefore, they are upcharged. Karen, that's ridiculous. I choose to ignore Karen and ring up her total. She chose a dozen, but half of those were specialty donuts and large pastries, therefore adding $4 to her standard $9 dozen. I then tell her the price, she scoffs loudly and then laughs in my face. Karen, that's crazy. I thought you told me it would be $9. Me, yes, but I also told you that some are upcharged. Karen, not that much of an upcharge. Me, well, half of your dozen were more expensive donuts. I go over to her box and point out the price of each individual donut she picked, clarifying which ones were higher priced specifically. Karen, but can I get a dozen of these? Points to our most popular seller, for $9? Me, yes. Karen, well, I wish you would have told me that. I would have gotten those instead. I can see the wheels in Karen's head turning. She's about to ask us that she's changed her mind and wants a different dozen. Meaning we have to take all dozen of her donuts out of the box and place them back on the trays. This does not sound too hard. However, donuts are delicate and handling them more than necessary equals smudged icing, squished dough and glove prints on the glaze, which makes it less appealing to other customers. Plus this means that we have to throw that box away as we cannot reuse it for another customer per protocol. My coworker could see I was shaking. She mouthed, "I will get this," and I stepped into the kitchen to take a breather. I'm not kidding when I say that Karen spent well over a half an hour choosing donuts and arguing with us about the prices. She asked if we had any sales going on. She said we didn't, so she asked if we could cut her specifically a discount since she drove so far to get here. I said no. Coworker and I spent the next 30 to 45 minutes handling Karen in shifts, each taking turns to argue and do our closing task. It is now past closing. We have to lock the door while Karen is still arguing because we cannot let any more customers in after hours. Karen resorts one more time to commenting that all donuts are made the same way and therefore should not be upcharged. I repeat again, ma'am, I'm sorry but I cannot change the price. Some of them take double the time to rise and bake. Some even take several specialty ingredients that are not available in bulk. That all comes out of pocket. Our bakers come in before dawn and work really hard to make these donuts from scratch and therefore price them appropriately based on labor and ingredients costs. That's just how it works here. Karen did not like that answer but seemed to be getting just as tired of the situation as we were. Angrily she pays for her donuts and walks out, but not before getting the last word in. It is just a shame that I drove all this way for you to be out of those pumpkin donuts, but it's whatever. Then she closes the door and coworker and I let out the biggest breath simultaneously. The real kicker here is that Karen walked out with $30 worth of donuts. She did not ask us to unbox her original dozen. Instead, she added another dozen plus more on top of her order. Obviously, money was not an issue after all. I wish this story had more of a gut-punching ending, but sadly it doesn't. Karen walked out still thinking it's okay to bully cashiers. But what blows my mind the most is how people like this have no concept of how a business works. If a business offers any kind of goods, how do you think they get those goods? We sure as hell don't bake our own money. If that were the case, then sure, you can get donuts for 15 cents a piece like you did in the 1930s. And the next one is titled Super Noisy Crazy Neighbor. So this was a few years ago when I was 23 male. I had a very old and possibly hallucinating neighbor that would bang on my wall when I was not even doing anything, constantly waking me up. I would yell back, "I'm sleeping, I'm damn sleeping." Bang, bang, bang. I tried everything, including knocking on his door and calling him. He refused to communicate, he just knocked on the wall and reported me to management for moving furniture. I was asleep. What a total idiot move. Cops got called, but I didn't do it. They saw a 23-year-old kid and were like, "Sure buddy, turn the music down." I had to prove it. I went out of town but set up a Ring camera in my room. They were on sale for like $70 and I was planning on returning it. Whenever he knocked, I had the footage. I then asked my roommate to document the cops being there as well. He set up a corner for his phone and answered the door. "Hey guys, this neighbor is hearing things. OP is not even in LA. Sorry, the tables had turned." Management was at this point telling him to stop calling the cops, but he did not comply. They started showing up every day, even when I was not home. I left notes on the door saying that he's crazy. I found emails. I nearly found a new place, but no, let's get petty. I arrived home with some giant speakers, like massive ones. I put them right up against a wall and cued the USSR national anthem. He was old, so my thought was, he probably hates this. I plugged in a mic as well. I'm a musician, so I have several lying around. I turned it up to 12 past 11. I was so excited, it was 8 PM. I just had to wait. Bang, bang, bang. Did not have to wait. My ears were distorting. The mic fed back, the noise was insane. For a moment there, the musings of Sergei Mikhalkov converted us all to communism. I stopped the music and screamed, "I was not making any noise, but I am now. Stop waking me up, douchebag." No response of course, but he called one more time a few days later, but I was here for the cops this time and showed them the Ring video and said that he was harassing me. I don't know what happened with the cops that night, but he stopped after that. And yeah guys, with this we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. And also check out my podcast by searching for Ripe Stories on Spotify, Amazon, Audible and other podcast platforms. You will often find exclusive episodes and early access to new content. Furthermore, please check out my Patreon by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or my YouTube membership program for even more exclusive stories. Thank you so much and I will see you again tomorrow.